Listen, folks, I have to talk to you for a minute. I've been haunted by this moment for hours now. Earlier today, I had an interaction on Instagram, and there's an individual who's building a YouTube channel around the idea of roasting whiskey tube, and he posted something on Instagram, and I thought it was a good idea for me to respond to it because there was a misspelling in it, and he called me the grammar police. It's not grammar to misspell, but I'll leave you to figure that out. But then he accused me of copy and pasting material and said, that was just, maybe that's what he needed to do, is just copy and paste, because that's what I do. And I don't know. I'm shook. What do I do here? How do I ever recover from this? It feels like I'm in the crosshairs of this person who's obviously going to build something incredibly successful. So I don't know what to do. So, hey, folks, thanks for joining me for this episode of the Embellish Podcast, a podcast focused on product stories, product storytellers, interesting brand ambassadors, and any other tangent that I happen to come up with. Whether you're a bourbon fan, a geek, a casual observer, or someone just floating through this channel, you're sure to waste a few minutes listening to what I have to say, and I hope you find it interesting. If you get here by chance, please take a moment to subscribe. I can be found on any podcasting platform. And if you can't find me on one, please send me an email at embellishpod@gmail.com, and I'll try to get that taken care of. I also generally live stream these recording of these episodes on YouTube on Wednesday nights at 9:30 Central Time. And this is the first week I've been able to do so in a couple. You can find all of my links on Instagram at embellishpod or Twitter with the same handle. I have a website. It is www.embellishpod.com. That is also a place to pick up any links, episode details, maybe even some one-off tasting notes. Today is February the 23rd of 2022. We're one day after the Tuesday, which is 2/22/22, which was a big deal for everybody apparently. And later on, we're going to talk about traveling in bourbon country, and we'll get to that later. Later on this week, I also, just as pre-show notes, I think that I'll be able to pick up locally a bottle from the Green River offering that was put out a couple weeks ago. Super excited to try that. I've seen some ups and some downs on it, but I'm always interested to try to support something new that is happening within the whiskey industry. I guess maybe new is not the right word, because Green River's been around for a long time. It's been OZ Taylor, but any new offering that's out there, I mean, it's a beautiful bottle design. They got something going on out there. Let's give it a shot and see what it is. I mean, I've got money to waste on far worse things than that. I was out of town last week. Was in Louisville for work. While I was there, visited a few things. I think I talked about some of that maybe on Friday. I don't really remember. I ended up with strep throat over the weekend, so don't know a whole lot of what I did Friday night. I also visited the Old Forester Distillery. It's always nice to step in there. I hadn't been in quite some time. On the off chance that something got stuck out on the shelf Friday morning, and obviously nothing was there, but people were hospitable. It's always a fun place to visit. And then earlier tonight, I had an opportunity to join David from Whiskey in My Wedding Ring podcast. And if you don't listen to him, go give it a listen. He's always got some fantastic stuff. But he had Fawn Weaver from Uncle Nearest on, and she's one of those people that's sort of a dream get for me. And at some point in time, I'll try to have her on this, because I think I've said it here, and I've said it here before. I'll say it again at some point in time in the future. I think she's probably hands down the best product storyteller in whiskey, and probably one of the best product storytellers in the United States, period, regardless of whatever market category you happen to operate in. But also on the same Q&A session that we had, Clay Risen was there. He's a fantastic author, got a lot of books that are both whiskey and non-whiskey related. Didn't get a chance to ask him a question. We only had a short amount of time, so maybe I'll get another opportunity. He's a great storyteller as well, via the written word. And there's something about that. I'm pretty sure if I dig around on my shelves long enough, I'll find a couple of his books. I can't remember. I haven't bought anything specifically because he's the author, but I do have a number of bourbon and whiskey books that I use for research whenever I want to do something, whenever I want to talk about an older, more storied brand, or dig up some esoteric piece of knowledge from the far, far past. It's a lot harder to copy and paste from a physical book. I actually have to read and type, maybe, instead of copy and paste. There's no Control-C, Control-V here. But tonight, we won't belabor this. It may end up being a shorter episode, just because didn't put a lot of planning into it. This one is one that I feel like I can talk off the cuff about a little bit. I've been there quite a few times, but visiting Bourbon Country, and you've got a couple of different regions when you talk about tourism in Bourbon Country specifically. There's the Bourbon Trail, there's a Kentucky Craft Bourbon Trail. Those both are things that you can do any amount of research on that you want to yourself. But you're going to be really focused on 3 specific cities as launching points for whatever your bourbon trip happens to be. We're local here, so the trips can be frequent. But for those folks that are coming in from the West Coast or wherever it happens to be that you're located, you may only get one chance every 5, 6, 7, 10 years to come and visit. And so I know there's a ton of videos out there already on visiting Bourbon Country. I'm going to toss mine in because why not? So you've got 3, like I said, you got 3 main cities to sort of launch out of. You've got Bardstown, you've got Louisville, and you've got Lexington. And those are the places that I would focus on if I were you. And tonight we're probably going to focus more around Bardstown and Louisville than we will around Lexington. Mainly because there's a larger airport in Louisville. There's this history in Bardstown. There's a number of things, and these won't be super deep dives either. So, doesn't matter where you stay, wherever you happen to stay, make sure you have access to water. You're gonna need it. Cold water, recovery water, water to wash the taste out of your mouth the next day, whatever. Whether there's a grocery store nearby and you pick up a case of water, whether you have access to it. We all know that the water out of the faucet in the hotel sometimes doesn't taste the greatest. Make sure you have water on hand. That's one of the things that I sort of messed up last week. I was traveling, and I wasn't even traveling for whiskey. I was traveling for work, and I didn't stock my hotel room with an appropriate amount of bottled water, and so I kept waking up borderline dehydrated. I think that maybe led to my immune system being down. But, it's a good thing, and, hotels usually have water accessible, but it's going to be super expensive as well. That's just a travel tip, period, not necessarily for this, but if you're going to be focusing on drinking copious amounts of whiskey, stay hydrated, friends. The first tip that I have: don't stay in Bardstown for more than a night or 2. The reality is, Bardstown's infrastructure is very much that of a small town. And aside from big events like the Kentucky Bourbon Festival, or any other thing that happens to be happening in that city, you have a limited number of facilities that are going to really cater to you. There's, as far as distilleries, there's Heaven Hill, Bardstown Bourbon Company, 1792, Willett. Maybe if you want to do Preservation Distillery, that's another one to sort of toss in there. But as far as public transportation, it is hot garbage. There's not a great opportunity to travel, and I can truly feel that one because I live in a small town, and so the idea of Uber or of Lyft or of any normal busing system, it largely doesn't exist, and so you're worried about, or you're looking towards figuring out your own transportation, which is perfectly fine if you have a designated driver for all of it. But if your plan is to hop from Willett to Bardstown Bourbon Company and then hop over to Preservation Distillery, you've got some roads to travel. You're going to want to taste some things while you're there, and that means somebody's going to have to potentially miss out, or you're going to rotate somebody in and out, or you have to make some logistic planning, and that's what makes Bardstown a little bit more painful. Whenever it comes to eating, you have places like Mammy's, and then there's Scout and Scholar, which is a restaurant, but it's also a microbrewery, and then Talbot Tavern. There's a host of other, sort of local type restaurants to eat there, and then a number of chain restaurants. But if you're looking for an upscale eating option, you're looking at like 3 or 4 total places, in my opinion. And I don't know everything about Bardstown, and so somebody from Bardstown's liable to hit me up and say, hey, whatever, this is not it. But the reality is, for the bourbon tourist traveler, Bardstown may be the place to start, but it's definitely not the place to stay for the entirety of the trip. They've got a handful of hotels there, a very small number of chain hotels. If you're looking for somewhere that runs off of points you already have, or you want to make sure you're continuing to get points, your options are somewhat limited. There's a Hampton Inn that's quite aged. There's a newer Holiday Inn Express and Fairfield Inn, which both of those are relatively nice. And then the La Quinta is being built and or finished right now. The last time I was there, it wasn't finished yet, but it looked like it was just a matter of time before it was finished. But if you'll notice, I didn't name any what would be considered premier brands. These are mid-tier to budget tier brand things. And then there's a bunch of local flavor places to stay. There's some motels, there's Airbnbs, but there's the Samuel's House as well, the Maker's Mark location. So there's options to stay there. But like I said, once you've sort of exhausted those distilleries, if you're there for bourbon travel, once you've exhausted those distilleries and maybe those restaurants, you're sort of done. And if you're looking at a week-long trip, it's hard to spend your entire time there. If you're going with a family, you can find a little more to do, because there's some historical sites to see. There's some nature things to do. My family and I have made the trip before, and we had a fantastic time. But the next logical progression, maybe you start in Bardstown and you work your way to Louisville, or you start in Louisville and work your way to Bardstown. If you're flying into town, you're obviously going to hit Louisville to begin with. But I think that, at least from my perspective right now, the best place to be for bourbon tourism is Louisville. And as much as the West Kentucky sensibilities in my brain say, please don't recommend Louisville, it's going through what I would relate to what Nashville went through half a dozen or a dozen years ago, as far as its growth, as far as its culinary scene, as far as its restaurants and whatnot. It's growing rapidly as far as what's available. Unique restaurants, unique hotels, unique opportunities. But then you also have sort of your mainstays that are there as far as distilling and tourism go into play. Keep in mind, if you are in Louisville, 4th Street is not where you want to be. 4th Street is a tourist trap through and through. It's an opportunity to be separated from significant quantities of your money for things that probably aren't quite valued at that. While I was in town last week, we stayed at the Seelbach, because that was a hotel that had a space that we could use for some of the meetings that we were having. They have a fantastic bar, but the reality is that the prices in that bar for some of their bourbon pours are incredibly outlandish unless you look at the budget tiers. And the budget tier bourbons that they have a pretty expansive list, but it's a little high. But if you're looking at a historical restaurant or historical hotel, the Seelbach is a great place to be. You also have things like the Galt House and the Brown that are all really fun places to stay if you're into history. And if you're not, you have Hyatts and you have Hiltons and you have all of the things that you could want. There's even some of the newer, funkier brands that exist in town. Distilleries can't be the entirety of your trip, so that's kind of the other part is. If you visit more than 3 distilleries in one day, you're likely going to be burned out on your palate. You may be just interested in kind of filling out your passport. That's perfectly fine. Go ahead and do that. But once you've exhausted those 3 distilleries, if you've got an 8-hour day, that may have taken 4 hours of your day or 5 hours of your day. You got 3 more to go, and you've got another day to spend and a host of things to do. So some things to kind of toss in front of you is visit Nulu. Nulu is a neighborhood that is east of Louisville proper. It's considered New Louisville. That's what Nulu sort of stands for. There's Prohibition Spirits is out there, which makes the Nulu brand of bourbon. Gravely is out there, which is a microbrewery. There's a restaurant out there called Agave and Rye, which was a really fantastic joint. Had kind of a trendy chic theme to it. It was tequila and bourbon, but it also had an arcade in it. It's sort of a place you can kind of get out there and just kind of kick around and see a few things. During the summertime, they have a bar that's got an outdoor volleyball, sand volleyball, maybe beach volleyball, I guess is what they call it, beach volleyball. Number of different things going on out in Nulu itself. And then in downtown Louisville, you have there's a really neat tiki bar that has some really unique offerings. While we were there, they had set up a absinthe pop-up. It was an opportunity to try out a bunch of different things. It was themed in such a way that might be interesting to you, and it's definitely got some degree of local flavor to it. It's not like popping in Guy Fieri's, whatever the name of that restaurant is, or as much as I hate to say it, like Gordon Biersch, which is, or GB, which is just it's one of a mini chain. Then you gotta make sure whenever you're traveling you look for those local flavor type places, because they're going to be far more interesting and you're going to probably learn more. And then as far as distilleries, got to hit Old Forester. You want to hit them in the morning. You want to schedule a tour, obviously, if you can. But if your interest is bottle hunting, you're going to want to try to hit Old Forester in the morning and see if they release anything, whether it's the President Series or the 117 or an old a birthday that happens to sneak out or some other thing. And the same things with the Evan Williams experience. Heaven Hill sometimes sticks out some things there as well. And then Michter's. And all three of these have fantastic tourist experiences that are available for you. You can go in, I believe in Evan Williams, you can fill your own bottle. Michter's, I think, used to do that. I don't remember if they still do or not. And then Old Forester's got a great tour going on there. And then maybe sort of lesser known, but you've got Old Carter that is setting up residence in downtown Louisville proper. And, I was going to be in town, and I was going to see if I could, find a way to meet up and, kind of have an experience with them. And our times weren't going to align, but I sent an email out, and they're like, absolutely, let us know what time you're going to be. We'd like to, have maybe do a tasting or a meetup or whatever in their facility, or you can kind of come into the gift shop or do whatever. So it's another brand to experience. If I remember correctly, Rabbit Hole is there as well. They've got a beautiful, beautiful facility, and then there's Peerless. I've talked about Kentucky Peerless a number of different times. They've got some really great single barrels that are available for sale in their distillery gift shop. You're going to have a great tour, going to have a great opportunity. So in a much smaller geographic vicinity, you can roll off 6 to 10 different distilleries that you could visit, as opposed to Bardstown's 3 to 4 with a more geographic disparity. But you're also going to have access to Uber or Lyft or Airbnb or a taxi cab or some other type of executive car service that happens to exist that's not going to cost you an arm and a leg because they're coming from somewhere else. And then there's opportunities once the distillery tours are over. If you're there during the week, a lot of those places are going to close at 5 or 6. What are you going to do after that? And Kentucky is one of those places that allows for a unique thing to occur that some other states don't, is that package stores can and do have tasting bars set up in them. They can sell quantities of tasting spirits to patrons as they come in. It's a separate license. It's not just a part of being a liquor store that everybody can do one, but they offer the opportunity to do so. And so you have a chance to go into places like Evergreen in Nulu or Frankfurt Avenue Liquors and try some really unique bottles. I've been in these places before where someone was already sitting at the bar and they're like, hey, it was more of a bar type environment than it was a liquor store, and they wanted to buy a drink for everybody, and I had an opportunity to try Michter's 10 at somebody else's tab. That was super nice, and that wasn't the expectation, but they had that there. They'll have some of their single barrels that they've particularly selected, and so that's a nice thing. If you're searching for bottles, you go into these stores, you have an opportunity to taste it. You have an opportunity to see if you think it's worth your money, and you make smarter decisions instead of coming home with 25 bottles and only 10 of them are things that you actually like. You get an opportunity to try them out, and then you can't mention liquor liquor store type environments in Louisville that you want to go into to taste without mentioning Justin's House of Bourbon, which not only has some of their unique selections, but they also have a really fantastic vintage library available for tasting. Of course, you're going to pay a premium because a lot of these, another thing that's unique to the state of Kentucky, and very few places do this, but a liquor retailer can purchase bottles from an individual to then resell. This gives them the opportunity to find from private collections vintage bottles, and you're talking about Chessmen, or you're talking about decanters, you're talking about 40-year-old Rip Van Winkle bottles, or whatever else. Justin's has, and you're going to pay for it. You're obviously going to pay for it because they're paying what would be considered an auction price for it, for an unopened. They're not buying opened bottles. They're only buying unopened and things that they can particularly validate to be legitimate things that are not forgeries, but there's an opportunity to taste some really, really unique things, and they've got to, they curate it. There's a person that's their entire job is to curate whiskeys from a vintage perspective that people are going to be interested in consuming. So it's a unique place. And then when it comes to food, food is going to be a concern for you. I already mentioned a restaurant out in Nulu, but there's going to be a lot of opportunity out in Nulu. But in Louisville itself, in the actual downtown area, because Nulu is I don't know if it's a subset, a neighborhood of downtown, an offshoot of downtown. I would think that Nulu residents are probably going to want to consider themselves separate from downtown, but we're all talking about blocks here, not miles. But there's, like hotel restaurants that are amazing. The 21C hotel has a really, really fantastic restaurant. There's a Brazilian steakhouse, which is part of a chain, but you can't go wrong with a Brazilian steakhouse. They're always fantastic. For my money, the best place to be for trying to attempt to do any degree of bourbon tourism is Louisville. If you were going to spend a night or two in Bardstown, that's perfectly fine, but Louisville's the place to be when it comes to bourbon right now. I've been to Lexington quite a few times, and maybe we'll talk about Lexington at a different time, but it's a completely different type of community. It's a different type of individual, and if you're not necessarily from Kentucky, it might not necessarily be as inviting. It seems like there's a degree more diversity that exists in Louisville than there is of that in Lexington. But it's also a city that's going to be really rife with tourists. While we were there in town, there was also a farm machinery show going on. So there were hundreds of thousands of farmers that had descended upon the town, and so wherever you're going to go eat, wherever you're going to go sit down is going to be just kind of packed with folks. And so that may be part of the detriment of making a place like Louisville the anchor to your particular travel. But that's where it sort of lands for me. Like I said, these are just my personal recommendations. They're worth almost nothing to you. Let me think. The only thing that I think I have left, I think that's going to kind of wrap up, just a quick high level concept of visiting bourbon country for me. Next week will probably be a recorded episode. I'm not going to do what I did last week. Last week none of it worked for me. I felt like that episode was pretty poor as a result. So apologize if you watched that and you thought it was terrible. But trying to sit down and do a live stream after being gone for 4 days and my immune system being down, and actually, not knowing it, but I was going to end up being sick the next day. I'm going to pre-record the next episode. We'll launch it on Wednesday and kind of see what happens from there. I'm going to be out of town. I'm going to go visit Austin, Texas. So maybe I'll learn some things about traveling to Texas for whiskey. I have some Still Austin on the shelf over here somewhere. I'm not really sure. And while we're there, the intent is to hopefully stop by the Crowded Barrel Whiskey Company or whatever, the Fang and Leather. We're gonna go out there and kind of visit with those folks. This is a work trip as well. Do some other stuff, see what I can come back with. Maybe I've got some fun things that I learned while I was down there. Hopefully it'll be significantly warmer than it is in Kentucky at this point. But that's what I got. I've got a couple of new interviews scheduled. I don't know if I'm going to talk about them anytime soon. I will say I've got the Jack and Tim from Monday Night Sucks. So Jack Bigadoo is the Hood Sommelier on Instagram, and Tim Van Riper is the Single Barrel Snob on Instagram. They're both going to be joining me to live stream on the 6th, which is not the normal day that I would live stream, but I'm going to do it because that's what meets our schedule, and I love hanging out with those guys. While I was in Louisville, I had an opportunity to spend some more time with Tim, just shoot the breeze with him, and just kind of hang out and whatnot. We're just going to talk for maybe an hour and see what happens. Then got a person lined up for later in March, and then maybe got some other things brewing with some other folks from Whiskey Tube and from social media platforms, and then maybe even some distillery type folks coming around, distillery or whiskey or blenders or whatever you want to call them. So if you've been here watching any of this, I appreciate it. Thank you for being here. Thanks for joining me tonight or today or whenever you happen to catch this. I hope you found whatever I was talking about entertaining. And if you did, please leave a review on whatever platform you are consuming this on, whether it is YouTube or Spotify. I guess technically not a review on YouTube, but you can subscribe on YouTube. But if you're on Spotify, if you're on iTunes or Google Podcasts or wherever, leave me a review. It really, really helps out with what I've got going on here. You can leave comments. I respond to all of them. You can share it with people, do whatever you want. You can hit me up on social media or on Instagram at EmbellishPod. Give me a follow, whatever. You can see what's going on. If you ever have any interest in joining me for an episode, reach out to me on those platforms. If you're a whiskey industry type person, I'm open to talking with you about whatever it is you've got going on. If you're just a regular human being like me and you want to taste through some of the things that I've talked about in past episodes that I might actually have access to, give me a ring and we'll absolutely put something together. You can hop on. I've done a blind before. I've got another one coming sometime in the future. It's a fun thing for me. So I can also be found at embellishpod.com. It has all of my links, accounts, contact details, so forth. Until then, I will be back at it again next week with another new offering for you that will be recorded.